Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast from the Timberwolves win over the Suns on Sunday, a Julius Randle buzzer beater. Today on the show, we'll talk about the three themes from the weekend: the overtime thrilling victory over the Kings on Friday, the exciting Randle buzzer beater and win over the Suns on Sunday, some common threads between the two games. We'll break it all down. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by FanDuel. You can start your season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Monday, everybody. Today, we're going to talk all about Wolves Suns on Sunday. I want to talk a little about the Kings game Friday, too, because there's a lot to take from that one as well. Really a lot to get to today. There were actually some common themes between Friday's game and Sunday's game, and both were exciting. Both were Timberwolves wins. They gave up a lot of points to really talented guards in both games, but that's not where the similarities stop. Although I guess there's a lot of the similarities are how that came about, right? How they gave up 60 to Fox on Friday and was it 44 to Devin Booker on Sunday. So we'll get into all that here next. We'll also talk about the Randle shot. We'll actually start there and a lot of the positives from Sunday's game, at least late in Sunday's game. So all that's upcoming here on the show today. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Also, a reminder about the Locked On Wolves newsletter. You can go to LockedOnDaily.com and sign up for your one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new Locked On Wolves newsletter. All right. So let's work backwards a little bit from the Julius Randle buzzer beater on Sunday's game. And then I want to get into my three themes is what I'm going to start to do, I think, for post-game pods. Although this will also include some stuff from Friday's Kings game that I want to talk about too. First, though, the Julius Randle shot was crazy. Obviously, the Timberwolves drew up a play where, like, hey, Ant's always going to be your first option, but assuming the Suns are jumping this, like, Randle's the next best thing. Assuming the Suns are jumping the passing to try and bring two on Ant or try and, press him against, I think, if I remember right, I think Ant was going to be pushed up against the sideline. It would have been really difficult to get the pass into him. And so Randle at the top of the circle is your next best option. And Randle shot the ball great in this game. We'll talk more about his performance, but the Wolves, obviously it was kind of an option 1A, 1B, and the shot was great. I actually don't think Randle really pushed off on Okogie. I think that was much more of a sell job by Josh Okogie than it was an actual offensive foul. That's a tough thing at that point in the game. The officials are very unlikely to call that offensive foul when you fall backwards dramatically like that in that situation, right? And obviously Randle still got to make the shot, and he did. Awesome game from Julius Randle, and obviously an awesome shot for Julius too, and it's good for him to get that kind of, I don't know, signature is a weird word for being like a month into the season, but basically his first big moment as a Timberwolf coming on the Target Center home floor, his, family and his kids right there on the sideline, on the opposite end of the floor there. So a great moment for him and for the Wolves. What got us there was like this was such a weird game. Because the Timberwolves looked and actually you go really to this point in the season through the first, how many games did the Wolves play? They're 8-6. They played 14 games. The first 14 games, it's like the first half is almost in every game has seemed like there's a complete lack of urgency. There were a couple games where they came out hot in the first quarter. I think maybe one of the Portland games. I think there was one other game maybe a week ago where they had a really strong first quarter and the middle stages of the game were bad and then they closed out poorly. But otherwise, it feels like it takes like a half for them to really play hard, which is not great. And that was the case in this game. The way the Wolves defended in the fourth quarter, it was nothing like how they defended in the first quarter. they actually looked like the Wolves from last year in the fourth quarter of this game. And weirdly, actually, the Kings game on Friday, this is one thing that was not similar. The first three quarters of the Kings game on Friday, the Wolves looked like the Wolves from last year. The fourth quarter was not good until Ant just started going nuts at the end of the fourth quarter and into overtime. And this game against the Suns, it was the opposite, where the fourth quarter they finally locked in and played hard. But for so much of the season, it's like it takes them a little bit of time to okay, we do have to get down into a stance and defend. We do have to get out on the perimeter and really, get into the grill at the point of attack of the offensive player and make them work. That they did not try defensively, frankly, until the fourth quarter of this game. And then it looked good when they were actually trying on the perimeter. And the similarity here between Friday's game and Sunday's game is, of course, De'Aaron Fox ended up with 60 on Friday. Devin Booker on Sunday ended with, I believe, 44 points on Sunday. And in each case, the Wolves started out not defending very well on the perimeter against Fox and against Devin Booker. Jaden McDaniels looked a step slow. Nickeil Alexander-Walker sometimes would get both those guys turned the corner on Alexander-Walker easier than you'd expect. Mike Conley wasn't effective against either one of them. And then the Wolves waited too long to put two on the ball. They never did it against Fox on Friday. I don't think a single time. I shouldn't say a single time. It was clearly not a regular strategy for the Wolves against the Kings to try and blitz De'Aaron Fox. And he took advantage of that to the tune of 60 points. And obviously the Wolves won the game, and that's the point. That's the most important thing, right? On Sunday, against the Suns, the Wolves eventually, in the second half, decided, let's put two on the ball. Now, it's interesting because last year, the Wolves barely ever had to do that, because between Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Mike Conley to a lesser extent, they had enough in Kyle Anderson last year. The perimeter defense was good enough one-on-one, and that combined with Rudy Gobert at the rim, that they didn't have to commit the resources of putting two on the ball. Which, if you don't have to, that's obviously preferred, right? As soon as you put two on the ball, your whole defense is in rotation, and if the offense is crisp with their passes and quick decision-making, very likely they can find the open guy and make you pay, right? That's the whole downside of putting two on the ball. But the Wolves' defense was good enough at the point of attack last year, and with the rim protection, that they never had to do it. And now it's hard to say if it's simply De'Aaron Fox being De'Aaron Fox and Devin Booker being Devin Booker, and each of them got on heaters within their respective games against the Wolves, or if this is I don't think all of a sudden Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker are not plus defenders, but in each of the last two games, they could not stop these dynamic guards one-on-one. And it took until midway through the third quarter, I think maybe, for Chris Finch to be like, all right, let's blitz this. Let's try and trap Devin Booker, try and get the ball out of his hands and make somebody else beat us. And for the most part, the Suns couldn't. And that's what allowed the Wolves back into the game. I mean, the Wolves were down by 10 at halftime. They were still down by, I think, 6 going to the fourth quarter. And the lead grew back up to 9 or 10, maybe even 11 early in the fourth quarter. But nobody else on the Suns. There was a brief hot streak from Grayson Allen in there, I think, in the third quarter. But that was it. The Suns only had 4 players in double figures. Grayson Allen had 18. Nobody else had more than 13. Only 2 starters scored in double figures for the Suns. With no Kevin Durant, it was a very, very limited rotation in terms of scoring punch. And, I mean, Tyus Jones only had 13 points on 12 shots in this game. Nurkic started and played only 14 minutes. Where else is the offense going to come from? And it took, I understand not wanting to commit the resources to putting two on the ball and put the rest of your defense in rotation, but you can't just keep doing the same thing and expect different results. So credit, eventually the Wolves decided hey, let's try and get the ball out of Booker's hands. And they did that. And he still ended up scoring 44, but a lot of that, I mean, what did he have at halftime? 25, something like that. And they at least made him more uncomfortable in the second half. They forced a couple turnovers. He ended the game with 4 turnovers, but there were a couple key ones in the second half. That adjustment defensively for Minnesota was super important. And that's just a reality. The Wolves must. And also, by the way, another side point here is because the Wolves have so many good athletes and so much length in their lineup, 1 through 5, almost regardless of who's on the floor, they should be able to rotate and recover better on the back end if they do commit 2 to the ball. So if you're putting 2 on the ball, your other guys that are in rotation, especially with Rudy Gobert roaming the back line, you should be okay. You should be able to rotate and recover better than some other teams can if you're putting 2 on the ball, if you need to, right? So that's one of my key themes from this weekend was Fox on Friday, Booker on Sunday, and the Wolves never put 2 on Fox. They eventually did it with Booker on Sunday, and it worked out. They won both games, but just a reality that they may need to do that at times this year. They may need to swallow their pride and say, all right, we keep getting beat off the dribble. Unless Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards want to, D up like they did last year. Again, not every team's going to have a De'Aaron Fox. Not every team's going to have a Devin Booker. We could look at who the Wolves have upcoming, and not every team's going to have a dynamic scorer in the vein of those guys that you're going to be forced to do something like that with. Like they're at Toronto on Thursday. They're off the next 3 days, and they're at Toronto. Like nobody on Toronto is really going to beat you in the same way that De'Aaron Fox and Devin Booker are. So you probably don't need to do that. And it's scary to do that against a team like Boston next Sunday because you have Jaylen Brown and you have Jason Tatum, you have other guys, multiple guys that can beat you. And of course, that becomes a problem. So, like, say Kevin Durant plays in this game, you can't put 2 on the ball when you have Durant and Booker out there. That will lead into my next point, which is when teams put 2 on Ant, which the Suns did for the majority of the game on Sunday, and it threw the Wolves for a loop offensively. They eventually figured it out, but ultimately, that's what led to Julius Randle having such a big game. So we'll get into that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by BetterHelp. This month, the month of November, is all about gratitude. It's all about being thankful. And I'm thankful for a lot of people in my life. Obviously, my parents, on a day-to-day basis right now, I'm thankful for my wife. She puts up with a lot. She puts up with me podcasting at all hours and watching Timberwolves games at all hours. And especially last week when the Wolves are on the West Coast, it was a whole thing, watching those games and podcasting in the middle of the night. But anyway, I'm thankful for her. I'm thankful for my family. And look, sometimes we're so worried about thanking, all these other people in our lives. You don't stop and thank yourself enough, right? Like it's hard to remind yourself that you're trying your best to make sense of everything. And in this crazy world, that isn't always easy to do. So remember, send some thanks to the people in your life, and that includes yourself. And this might be the right time of year also, as you're thanking yourself, to think about trying therapy. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. This might be the right time of year for you to do it heading into the holidays. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. For BetterHelp, you could just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right. So the first theme from the weekend was the Timberwolves finally breaking down and putting 2 on the ball to try and force the ball out of Devin Booker's hands on Sunday. And them not doing that against De'Aaron Fox on Friday, and that almost costing them the game. Now, the other thing we saw this weekend was Anthony Edwards on Friday against the Kings. He had 36, went crazy in the fourth quarter, had a couple really tough traditional and one buckets late in the fourth quarter. He also had that massive dunk in the second half of the game. He had some tough, the impossible 3-pointer that was changed to a 2-pointer in overtime in the left corner. It was awesome on Friday. Well, the Suns on Sunday said, hey, look, we're just gonna blitz Anthony Edwards. We're just gonna try and trap the ball and get the ball out of his hands. I think he only had 5 or 6 shot attempts at halftime, and I think he had 5 points at halftime, if I'm not mistaken, against the Suns on Sunday. And the Wolves weren't figuring it out otherwise. They couldn't figure out how to score efficiently otherwise. They eventually, Julius Randle was kind of the one, and we'll talk about that. Dante DiVincenzo, I guess it was the second quarter when he kind of went off for a stretch. Nas didn't score it all early, and they weren't getting the ball to Rudy, and it was just kind of inefficient, inconsistent offense. And they really struggled to get going when the Suns were forcing the ball to Ant's hands. Eventually, it was Julius Randle stepping up. Early in the game, it was like basically think of it the opposite of what I was talking about before, right? When the Wolves put 2 on the ball, you have to rotate and recover on the back end. And usually it's not the first pass, but it's the second or third pass that kills you, right? If you don't rotate or recover fast enough from putting 2 on the ball to get to that second or third pass away and contest a shot or, just at least provide some resistance. And the Wolves offensively, what's killed them this year when teams have doubled Ant is they haven't knocked down open 3-point shots consistently enough. We saw that during the 3-game losing streak, during really the 2 games against Portland, especially. They just missed open threes. I think it was the second game against Portland. It was just brick city, right? Like sometimes it's just the Jadens of the world and the Nickeil Alexander-Walkers of the world that just have to knock down open threes, open corner threes in a lot of cases, but just to make the defense pay. Other times, it's just going to be Julius Randle. Like Julius Randle just has to go to work. It's like when teams would do that last year and it had to be Karl-Anthony Towns. That's your secondary scorer that puts pressure on the defense, can score one-on-one, because if they're putting 2 on the ball, Julius Randle's not going to see double teams. He should never see double teams. And he should be able to go to work. Now, in this game, they saw a little bit of both. And we'll talk a little bit about the team shooting here in a minute. But early in the game, we saw DiVincenzo knock down some threes. We saw eventually Jaden hit a couple of threes in this game. And it was good to see the Wolves. I think Conley hit one really early. I think he might have hit their first 3 of the game and didn't actually attempt a 3 the rest of the game. Only scored 3 points in this game, but he was very good. It's just making open threes. And then in Julius Randle's case, a lot of times he's just one pass away from Ant. He's just got to attack. He's got to catch and go. And in theory, not in theory, also in practice, Julius Randle's better at this than Karl-Anthony Towns. As much as Karl-Anthony Towns is a more dynamic and more efficient 3-level scorer than Julius Randle, we all know the problems that Cat would get himself into with kind of overthinking these mismatches or opportunities where Ant's getting doubled, ball rotates to Cat. I'm going to take this off the dribble. I'm so excited to take the ball off the dribble. I'm going to run somebody over and use an off arm. I'm going to just, barrel into the defender and create an offensive foul. We've seen a couple of games where Randle's gotten a little bit carried away like that, and he plays more like a bowling ball. But the difference is somehow Randle is more controlled when he does it than Karl-Anthony Towns, who's always limbs flailing and you never know what's going to happen next, except for you do, because it's usually an offensive foul. With Randle, that's less of a problem. And he took advantage of some mismatches in this game. The Suns played a bit smaller, and Randle is much better, and I've talked about this quite a bit, at punishing mismatches than Cat ever has been. Cat, again, same thing, right? He would get overexcited with the mismatch, even if it was a guard in the post. Like we saw Boston last year guard him with, was it Jaylen Brown, I think, that was guarding Karl-Anthony Towns in the post? Is that who it was? I can't remember. One of their guards was guarding him in the post. And there were other teams that did the same thing. We saw this in the playoffs a little bit with Dallas. Like, hey, let's guard him with a small because Cat doesn't know what to do. He either commits an offensive foul or he kind of panics or he assumes a double team's coming. And but Julius Randle, he sees a mismatch and it's blood in the water and he goes right to work. We saw a little bit of that. We saw a little bit of attacking off the catch. He also knocked down some 3-pointers early in this game. He knocked down the buzzer beater before halftime. He knocked down the buzzer beater at the end of the game. He clearly was feeling it. And the Suns knew they had to respect the 3-point shot, so he would attack the closeout and he'd play off the catch and go get a bucket, drive into the paint. And also, he's such a good passer. He actually led the Wolves in assists in this game too, 7 assists for Julius Randle. So when opponents put 2 on the ball with Ant, as long as Ant can get the ball out of his hands with relative rhythm, Randle can catch and attack. Randle can catch and shoot. Randle can catch, attack, and then kick to the next open guy. And maybe the ball gets back to Ant, right? That was the whole thing we talked about last year in the playoffs, is Ant has to understand that usually when the opponent is putting 2 on the ball, the answer isn't, let's split the double team and try and do everything ourselves. It's rotate the ball, make the right basketball play, and the ball may find you again. And when the ball comes back to you in the same possession, they're not going to be able to double you effectively unless it's the very end of the shot clock. You're pretty likely going to get your one-on-one. Just early in the possession, they're trapping you to get it out of your hands and try and make somebody else beat you. And that's when you need your Jadens and your Nas and your Nas's and your Conleys to knock down open shots, especially threes. But if they don't take those shots and the ball gets back to Ant, then he'll get a one-on-one opportunity more likely than not. Or it's Julius Randle attacking a one-on-one opportunity. So that was another theme of the weekend, something the Kings didn't do, and Ant scored 36 on Friday. The Suns did do it. Ant only had 5 in the first half, but in the second half, Ant made the right plays, and then for a while there in the third quarter, it was Ant and Booker going toe-to-toe, back and forth, and Ant didn't shoot the ball well early in this game. He ended up shooting just 3 of 7 on threes, which, normally that's a fine number, but for this year, that's half as many makes and attempts than he's been averaging per game. But Ant ended up having a fine statistical game because of his third quarter and because the decision-making was good for him overall in this game. So that really stood out to me as another really important theme here of the weekend. And then my last thing before we get to studs and duds is, at the risk of oversimplifying the game of basketball, period. Like, this is a pretty grand statement. So, like, these two games underscore this point so much. So much of this game of basketball in the NBA is just not turning the ball over like crazy, offensively, I should say, and just making open threes. I actually think the Wolves' offensive process this season has been really good. It's the defense that has been poor. And I said this last week plenty. And of course, that was the case against Sacramento, and it was the case against Phoenix. They won both of those games. But they're generating open shots. They just missed a ton of them in Portland last week. They've missed a ton of them at times this year. But in the Kings game on Friday, the Wolves only turned it over 11 times in an overtime game. And they shot 41% from 3. Against the Suns on Sunday, the Wolves turned it over 14 times. Sloppy a little bit. Here and there they were sloppy. They shot 44% from outside the arc. They were generating open shots in these games. They were just missing some of these open shots. And defensively, they struggled in both of these games. So but here's the thing. Like, I do think eventually the defense comes around. I know I've been saying that. But as I said before, like, they're not going to face Devin Booker, De'Aaron Fox every game. And I think obviously the real you got to beat Toronto on Thursday, but then playing at Boston on Sunday, how are they going to defend Tatum and Brown? How are the Wolves going to defend in the perimeter in that game? I do think both Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker need to level up defensively. I think Ant's actually been pretty good on the perimeter so far this year. Now, I say that. He got beat off the dribble by Josh Okogie a couple of times in this game. He also had no interest in boxing out, and Okogie beat him baseline for a tip slam at the end of the first half. So, like, that notwithstanding, I think Ant's perimeter defense has been okay overall this season, but McDaniels and Alexander-Walker need to be a little bit better. All that to say, offensively, I think the Wolves, for the most part, have been generating good shots. And part of that is when teams put 2 on Ant, they generate open shots. Part of it is just Ant being Ant and breaking down the defense, and he's been a flamethrower. But if they're making threes and they're not turning it over, they're going to win most nights. And that may be true of a lot of teams, but I think because of the Wolves' high-level talent and the level at which they're going to be making threes, if they're shooting over 40% because of the volume they're taking, and if they're not turning it over, they're going to take a higher volume of threes, right? That's why turnovers are so damaging, because not only are you giving the other team the ball, especially in a live ball situation, but you're sabotaging yourself the opportunity of putting the ball up at the basket, putting the ball up on the rim. So the less turnovers you have, the more three-point attempts, more shot attempts, period, you're going to have. And that again, it's very obvious, but that stood out to me because you go back to those Portland games last week and the Wolves were like, under 30% from 3. Like, you're not going to win shooting under 30% from 3. So you just got to make your open shots. And some nights you're not going to. And you got to find other ways to win. And they simply haven't shown enough fight to do that yet this season. So things have needed to go right in terms of, knocking down those open shots for them to win to this point. Okay. Let's do individual studs and duds. We'll peek ahead at the week as well. That's how we'll close the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. On Monday night, you have the Texans at the Cowboys. The Texans are touchdown favorites. Houston's a -7 on the road at Dallas. Of course, Dak Prescott out for the season for the Cowboys. and other injuries as well. CeeDee Lamb, I think, is questionable for the game. So a lot of reasons for that. Actually, I don't mind the spot for the Cowboys to be a little bit more competitive. I don't know that I would. I don't know that I would take the Texans -7. I don't know. Texans money line is -375. That's probably not worth anybody's time. But anyway, Texans 7-point favorites at the Cowboys on Monday Night Football. No line yet for the Wolves and Raptors on Thursday. Go check it out at FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Individual studs and duds for the Wolves from the Phoenix game. Julius Randle, obviously a stud, 35 points, 11 of 20 shooting in this game for Julius. 35 on 20 shots is fantastic. 5 of 11 on threes. He was 8 of 9 at the free throw line. That's something that to me was one of the things I was most excited about for having Julius Randle on the Wolves was his free throw rate is great for his career. He gets the line a lot more than Karl-Anthony Towns, and it's good to see him finally kind of ramp that up a little bit. Also, I mentioned earlier, 7 assists, only 3 turnovers to the 7 assists, and 4 rebounds for Julius Randle in 34 minutes. A really strong game from him. He had some moments, some defensive lapses. That's been a common theme for him this season. He's got to shore that up a little bit. That was one of those things that I was a little worried about with him coming over from the Knicks, and it has been an issue. But he was the best player on the floor for the Wolves in this game, played extremely well. Other stud, Anthony Edwards, ended up with 24 points on just 14 shots in this game. He was 6 of 7 on 2-point shots and 3 of 7 on 3-point shots. Hit a couple of mid-range shots, hit a real tough bank shot from the right side of the floor about 12 feet away late in the game that was huge, and I think put them on top or tied the game or something. But he took a couple of tough mid-range shots in this game and made them. I thought overall it was still a really strong decision-making game for Ant. Also 6 assists, only 2 turnovers for Anthony Edwards. The first half was tough. I mentioned earlier he got beat off the dribble by Josh Okogie. A couple possessions later, he got beat on a corner crash from Josh Okogie for a tip slam toward the end of the first half. And what else did he do? Oh, he had the live ball technical. That was like in a span of 5 minutes in the second quarter where he's dribbling the ball. Grayson Allen literally does grab his left arm. The ref doesn't see it because it's on the opposite side. Ant complains to the official and gets called for a technical during live action. And then he has those 2 bad plays with the Okogie on the other end. Really a rough stretch for Ant. And credit to him, though, he got it together in the second half of this game and finished with 24 and 6, plus the 4 rebounds and a couple of turnovers in 39 minutes. He also played extra. He played 39 minutes in this game. I'm sure in part because they have 3 days off now. They don't play again until Thursday, but he started the fourth quarter. Usually he sits for the first 4 or 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. He did end up leaving after a couple of minutes and sat for a few and came back in, but Finch clearly altered that substitution pattern because he knew they couldn't get down any further at the start of the fourth quarter. And they did, actually. They still had a rough start to the quarter. But anyway, Ant had obviously a really strong close to this game too. But that third quarter back and forth he had with Devin Booker was awesome. And generally speaking, like the second half for Ant was very, very good. Third stud for this game has got to be Donte DiVincenzo. He was relatively quiet in the second half. I think 4 of his 5 made threes were in the first half. But he got on that heater at a really important time for Minnesota when they were down double digits and they needed a boost. And DiVincenzo has been pretty bad for the last week. No other way to put it. He finished with 15 points, 5 of 10 outside the arc. He had 3 assists and no turnovers, was a plus 10 in 26 minutes off the bench for DiVincenzo, which, by the way, Nas was a minus 15 in 22 minutes. So for DiVincenzo to be a plus 10 in 26 minutes tells you how impactful he was when he was on the floor. That lineup with the 3 bench guys, Nas, DiVincenzo, and Alexander Walker, with Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley, is pretty interesting. And that worked out fairly well in this game for Chris Finch. And I think we'll see him continue to go to that lineup a bit. I should also mention rotation-wise. Actually, real quick, I don't have any duds in this game. Conley only had 3 points, but he also only attempted 2 shots. He had 3 assists. He had second best plus-minus on the team in this game. I thought Jaden was pretty good defensively. A couple silly fouls. He was all right. He hit a couple of threes. No real bad moments for anybody, or I should say bad performances by individual players. Rob Dillingham only played 6 minutes all in the first half, but he is appearing to move into that kind of ninth man role, which sometimes has been Josh Minot. Early in the season, it was Joe Ingles. Joe Ingles is now like the late game inbounder role. That's apparently what he does. He got the assist on the inbound pass to Julius Randle's game winner and also inbounded the ball late in the Kings game. Anyway, Dillingham played 6 minutes, missed a couple of shots. He short-armed a floater that really should have just been a layup. It's like he got scared and didn't want to get it all the way to the rim and floated it from 8 feet instead of just going all the way to the rack. Also had a bad turnover. So a rough 6-minute stretch. He's not a dud, though. He only played 6 minutes. And, good to see him get a little bit more run. DiVincenzo, by the way, was questionable coming into the game with back spasms and obviously had his best game in a while. Probably, honestly, his best regular season game to this point, I think. Pretty close to it. So all that to say, good to see Dillingham get a few minutes, hopefully against the Raptors on Thursday. Both he and Minot get a chance to play. If the Wolves can take care of a little bit of business early in that game and give themselves a bit of a cushion, perhaps we'll see some more of those bench guys playing. Schedule-wise for the Wolves this week, they don't play Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They play the Raptors Thursday night in Toronto. This was just a one-game matinee homestand. And then they're at Boston next Sunday. So they get one game in Toronto, then 2 days off, and a Sunday afternoon game again next week. So the rest of this week, we'll look at some lineup data the next couple of days. We'll dig in a bit into this, like that bench lineup I just mentioned, the 3 main bench guys plus Conley and Gobert. We'll talk a bit about some of the small ball lineups. Some fun with numbers here as we've been doing kind of the early middle portions of the week. We got a couple days here to do that. And then, of course, Thursday, we'll preview that Raptors game as well. All right, that's all we got for you today here on the show. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.